Chapter 481. The Sword Principle Meeting begins. Jian Wushuang and Jian Nantian spent the night talking under the moonlight. It was Jian Wushuang's most heartwarming night in the recent years. The next day, the valley was already in an uproar at first light. The experts walked out of their rooms and hurried towards the mountain where the heart-killing sword had been placed. A short while later, a large group of experts had gathered in front of the mountain. Naturally, Jian Wushuang and Jian Nantian were among them. Besides these experts, there were two other people present that attracted everyone's attention. One of them was a stout man with tanned skin, his body surrounded by a thunderbolt. The other one was a thin and elegant young man with a folding fan in his hand. Their overbearing aura shocked many experts on the spot and instantly revealed their identity as marquises. They are Marquis Wanlei and Marquis Nanyu. Neither of them is an expert in sword principle. What are they doing here? BG container 63275 CC1F display, flex direction, column align items, center justify content, center Z index, 214-748-3647. Important, they obviously came here for Jian Nantian. The onlookers were discussing the current situation in a low voice. With his eyes squinted, Jian Wushuang looked at the two marquises and nodded. There were both strong and weak marquises. Most of the well-acknowledged among the 72 marquis were in the normal seven-cloud realm, and some of them did not even possess a Dao weapon. Marquis Piaoxue and Marquis Tsangyue were part of the latter. They wanted to kill Jian Nantian, and by doing so they could gain two Dao weapons. Many experts and marquises were here for the same reason. The two marquises had made their way to the valley the very same night after they heard the news. However, though they had been in the valley, for fear of annoying Su Ming, they had to wait until Jian Nantian left the valley to kill him. Since these two marquises rushed here the moment they heard the news, Marquis Xiefeng must have heard the news as well. Jian Wushuang thought while frowning. Right then, with a group of attendants surrounding him, a white-robed man came down. He was a handsome man with a wicked smile on his face and a compelling manner. The experts could not help but be drawn to the man as their eyes fixated on him. Even Jian Wushuang was impressed and shot the man a glance. Is he Su Ming? Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes. From the chat with his father last night, he had learned that Su Ming was the traitor of Sword Ancestors' bloodline and had something to do with the fall of the bloodline. Yet, only the top experts of the Divine Land knew about it. The common people still thought of Su Ming as the Sword Ancestors' personal disciple. Everyone's eyes turned towards Su Ming when he came out, everyone except for Jian Nantian. He did not spare Su Ming a glance from the very beginning. He stood straight, with his eyes closed, as if he was asleep and had no idea of Su Ming's arrival. For him, only his sword and Jian Wushuang deserved his attention. Your Excellency! I pay my respects to Your Excellency. The experts saluted Su Ming one after another, and even Marquis Wanlei and Marquis Nanyu paid their respect with a bow. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be so courteous. Su Ming spoke in a soft and fascinating voice. The experts straightened their backs. Wanlei, Nanyu, I didn't expect that you would come here. Su Ming looked toward the marquises with a smile. We'd love to see how powerful the heart-killing sword is, said Marquis Wanlei. Really? Su Ming sneered and continued, I reckon you're here for something else. Upon hearing this, Marquis Wanlei and Marquis Nanyu exchanged an embarrassed look. All right. I don't care what you do when you're outside, but you'd better behave yourselves in Sword Suppression Valley, said Su Ming. Of course, we will. Marquis Wanlei and Marquis Nanyu nodded heavily, not daring to say one more word. After all, they were just in the seven-cloud realm and at the bottom of 72 marquis, so they had to show their respect, even to Marquis Xiefeng, let alone Su Ming, one of 9 sovereigns. They knew very well how powerful and terrifying Su Ming was. Though this sovereign looked gentle and elegant for the moment, he was known as Sword Demon among the top experts in the Divine Land. His personality became quite chilling when it was time to kill. A half-day from now, the heart-killing sword will begin to wake up. Don't miss this rare opportunity. After saying this, Su Ming shut his mouth. However, the crowd got into a heated discussion. Swordsman, Qianming Lord, look, there are secret chambers at the foot of the mountain, said Hunjian Lord. Secret chambers. Jian Wushuang followed the Lord's line of sight and spotted the chambers. Half a day from now, the heart-killing sword will begin to awaken, erupting with sword essence. The essence itself is an opportunity, and the nearer we are to the sword, the better our benefit will be. Since there are a total of 100 secret chambers that are the closest to the sword, we'll definitely benefit greatly if we can enter one of them. Are there only 100 chambers? Qianming Lord frowned and asked. There were hundreds of experts here, and 100 chambers were definitely not enough. Are you really thinking that every one of us will be able to occupy a chamber? Hunjian Lord laughed and continued, let me tell you this, 100 is more than enough. At the previous meetings, less than 30 people were able to make their way into the chambers. Why? Qianming Lord was confused. You'll know soon. Hunjian Lord put on a mysterious smile. Chapter 482, The Impact of the Sword Essence. A half-day had passed while the experts waited impatiently. The hole in the mountain where the heart-killing sword was placed finally began shaking. It's beginning. All the experts concentrated on the hole. Buzz, the shrill echo of a sword resounded throughout the area as a red light covered the sky above the hole. At the center of the light, a matchless magic weapon was slowly rising into the air. Everyone at the scene held their breath while staring at the rising weapon with intent. The heart-killing sword, the sword ancestor's weapon as well as the #1 magic weapon in sword principle. Is this the heart-killing sword? Jian Wushuang stared at the floating long sword in the red light, his eyes filled with amazement. The sword was completely red and radiated a chilling light. Even at first glance, people could tell it was a world-shaking sword of killing. However, that was not what startled Jian Wushuang. Instead, it was because the sword was so similar to his triple-kill sword. .bg container 63275 CC1F display, flex direction, column align items, center justify content, center Z index, 214-748-3647. Important. Although it was different in color and size, the two swords were the same in every other way, including the hilt and the mysterious crack on its blade. The #1 magic weapon in sword principle. The experts called out in admiration, and their eyes were burning with greed. Every expert in sword principle had a great desire to possess this sword, but none of them had been able to in the past 1,000 years since Sword Ancestor's death because the sword was too powerful to control. Suddenly, the floating sword quivered and another piercing sound echoed, seeming to reach the heavens. A formidable sword essence was unleashed, so overwhelming that wherever it passed, the sky became dark and the void began to ripple. The whole world seemed to be filled with a thrilling atmosphere. Here it comes. As the experts gazed at the sword essence that was rushing towards them at a visible speed, their eyes narrowed and they prepared themselves. Nonetheless, they looked pale after the sword essence swept over them, and some of them even lost their senses. Very few could face the impact with ease. Now I finally understood what you meant. Qianming Lord cast Hunjian Lord an eye. He looked terrible. Though his sword soul phantom had appeared, he could barely block the sword essence with its power. The Lord struggled to march forward, but the closer they moved towards the heart-killing sword, the more they were impacted. They completely believed that the sword essence around the secret chambers had to be unbearably powerful. Among the experts, quite a few could still move to the chambers under the impact. Right now it's just the sword essence erupting. Soon, there will be thousands of swords saluting the heart-killing sword. Before that happens, we need to get as near to the sword as we can so that we get the most out of this opportunity, Hunjian Lord said in a low voice. Let's go. With a shout, the Lord managed to march one step forward. Not just him, the other experts also tried their best to get closer to the heart-killing sword. However, as the strength of the sword essence increased, their path forward became even harder. Swish! A flowing light shot across the sky at amazing speed and approached the foot of the mountain in an instant as if he was not affected by the sword essence at all. He picked a chamber and walked in. The experts were not surprised to see this because the flowing light was no other than Su Ming. As one of the 9 sovereigns, Su Ming was called Sword Demon and had reached great heights in sword principle. It was believed that he was only second to Sword Ancestor at his peak, so it was easy for him to bear the impact from the sword essence. On the contrary, The others were in the middle of a difficult struggle. For example, when Jian Wushuang first experienced the impact, he could barely take it. That is, until he released his 2 sword soul phantoms to help him. Jian Wushuang moved firmly, step by step. Though the impact slowly grew more powerful, he managed to make it to the mountain quickly enough with the help of his double sword souls. Not bad. Suddenly, he heard a soft voice from beside him. He followed the voice and saw his father, Jian Nantian, staring at him in front of a chamber. Jian Wushuang shrugged before walking into one of the chambers. He had accomplished something that many other experts wanted to do as well. Being closer to the heart-killing sword meant the chambers would provide the best benefits. However, only a dozen people made their way to the chambers despite everyone who was struggling hard, and those who succeeded were real geniuses in sword principle. As for Hunjian Lord and Tianming Lord, they had gained a lot in sword principle, but they were still too weak to make it to the chambers. Looks like we have to stop here. Hunjian Lord's face turned red. He was unwilling to give up, but he couldn't move forward even one more step, let alone crossing the 30 meters that separated him and the chambers. He was exhausted and at his limit. Swordsman was able to enter a chamber. I really envy him. Hunjian Lord looked towards the chambers with an envious expression. He was not the only one to have such a feeling. Those who failed to approach the chamber all felt the same. After all, only inside one of the chambers could they experience the 1,000-sword salute in the most profound way. Under the red-colored patch of sky, a matchless sword chi was being released from the blade of the heart-killing sword, which was still surging with an overbearing sword essence. At this moment, Jian Wushuang, Jian Nantian, and Su Ming, as well as the others in the chambers and those who were not, all raised their head. Chapter 483, 1,000-Sword Salute. Within the secret chamber, Jian Wushuang raised his head and stared fixedly at the scarlet longsword which was beneath the blood river. The upper stone walls of the chamber were made up of completely transparent gems which thus allowed him to clearly see everything behind them. The scarlet, long sword, under the gaze of everyone present, suddenly emitted the matchless sword chi of the sword ancestor. This unsurpassed sword chi quickly ran through all of heaven and earth. The scarlet longsword's blood-red body became ever more dazzling, causing it to appear like the emperor among swords as it suspended in the air. In Sword Suppression Valley was gathered a large number of sword principle experts, among whom some carried their longswords on their backs, while others kept their longswords in their interspatial rings. But following the appearance of the sword chi, clang 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 clang. Within the valley, every sword which was a second-grade magic weapon or better began to point toward the heart-killing sword, regardless of whether they were carried on the experts' backs or kept in interspatial rings. Thousands upon thousands of weapons glowed in all shades of brilliant colors and bowed respectfully toward the emperor among swords as if they were its subjects. In turn, it let out a shrilling sword echo to indicate its enjoyment of the 1,000-sword salute. The 1,000-sword salute. The crowd of sword principle experts expressed their inner shock at the sight of this scene. Even Jian Wushuang, who was in the secret chamber, was equally shocked when he saw his triple-kill sword bowing toward the heart-killing sword. The BG container 63275 CC1F display, flex direction, column align items, center justify content, center Z index, 214-748-3647. Important, this was a 1,000-sword salute indeed. The emperor among swords had received the adulation of thousands upon thousands of swords. Also, a peculiar wave had begun to spread as the salute started. The deeply mysterious wave contained a matchless sword essence of killing. Right at this moment, everyone within the valley seemed to hear a roar coming from the heart-killing sword. Kill! Kill everyone in the world who's disloyal. Kill! Kill everyone in the world who's unfilial. Kill! Kill everyone in the world who's unrighteous. Every word of this roar was powerfully clangorous, broadly imposing, and universally shocking. Every word contained profound mystery as it diffused throughout. The valley turned gravely silent. The sword principle experts in the valley hurriedly closed their eyes and seized this rare opportunity. Jian Wushuang too closed his eyes. He had been unable to control his triple-kill sword, which remained in a reverent pose, and thus he could only use his finger as a sword as he began to practice within the secret chamber. He exerted a strike which was extremely ordinary and dull. It did not cause even the slightest of waves within the chamber. Jian Wushuang withdrew his finger but quickly exerted another strike. Every subsequent strike he exerted was equally insipid. However, with every strike, the sword light generated became more beautiful in a poignant sense. After 31 successive strikes, he exerted his 32nd. This particular strike was as dull and ordinary as the rest, but a dazzling arc light appeared in the direction of the sword light it generated. The arc light was not only bright and dazzling, but also incomparably beautiful in a poignant sense. So beautiful that it was enchanting. Upon close observation, it was not difficult to see that it was the same strike which Xianxia had exerted the previous night. And its name was simply enchant. It was the third move of the heart-killing sword technique, enchant. Jian Wushuang had never gained understanding of this move before, but now mastered it with only a little practice, thanks to the opportunity provided by the 1,000-sword salute. At the same time, he gained not only swordsmanship but also an understanding of the slaughter origin. The unsurpassed sword chi of killing from the heart-killing sword had caused him to involuntarily fall into an epiphany, which immediately provided him with a whole new understanding of the slaughter origin. All of a sudden, he was able to understand many of the riddles surrounding the first restriction of the 6-story pagoda. He remained with his eyes closed, but on his right arm, which originally had only 5 slaughter origin marks, quickly formed a 6th from the large amount of slaughter origin that gathered on his arm as a result of the understanding he gained from the epiphany. The formation of the 6th mark was not the end, for a 7th began to form as well. It took shape in only a short time. The 7th origin mark. It ought to be known that the origin understandings which the marks represented were equivalent to the clouds of the Cloud Realm experts, except that they were not as powerful as the latter. This 7th mark meant that once Jian Wushuang attained the Cloud Realm, he would become a being of the 7 Cloud Realm, which was the level of the average Marquis. Despite gaining understanding of the third move of the heart-killing sword technique and having the 7th mark of the slaughter origin formed on his arm, he remained in a state of epiphany. Now, it was Jian Wushuang's sword soul that transformed. Originally, 2 firm and tough sword souls rested quietly within his sea of consciousness. At present, however, they were beginning to shake violently, and their volumes sharply expanded together with the frenzied sweeping across of obscure streams of sword essence. Shortly after, traces of sword soul energy surged out from them, and a third sword soul gradually formed within the sea of consciousness. At the same time, 3 majestic sword soul phantoms appeared behind Jian Wushuang. Each of them was nearly 100 feet tall and emitted a terrifying sword essence. 3 sword souls. And they were all first grade. Jian Wushuang only came round from his epiphany after the third sword soul had completely taken shape. 3 sword souls. He revealed a faint smile on his face when he felt the 3 sword souls within his sea of consciousness and the 3 sword soul phantoms behind him. The power of the sword souls was abnormally profound and exceedingly rare. To be able to awaken 3 sword souls at the same time was something few and far between throughout the entire divine land. For instance, Jian Wushuang had seen only his father doing so during the sword principal meeting. However, of the 3 sword souls awakened by his father, only 1 was first grade, while the other 2 were second grade. But he was different. He had awakened 3 first-grade sword souls. Something's not right. His complexion suddenly changed, and he peered toward the 3 sword souls in his sea of consciousness. These 3 sword souls. He furrowed his brows. For some reason, upon seeing the sword souls, he had a false impression that they should not be separate and should instead be a single entity. I feel that these 3 sword souls can be joined into one. An idea arose in his heart. It was an idea which could be considered crazy. However, he could not inhibit it once it flashed across his mind. Joined as one. These 3 sword souls should be joined as one. The heavenly creation skill naturally began to operate in his body as he harbored this idea, in accordance with which the 3 sword souls in his sea of consciousness actually began to slowly amalgamate. Chapter 484, Holy SHT, 3 sword souls joined as one. The deeply mysterious 1,000 sword salute provided a massive opportunity. Many of the sword principle experts in Sword Suppression Valley cherished this type of opportunity to the highest degree and were thus meditating in full concentration. Those whose comprehension levels were as high as Jian Wushuang's entered an epiphany in little time. An epiphany was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and the benefits were huge upon going through one. As time passed, the scarlet long sword, which emitted an unsurpassed sword chi of killing beneath its bloody light, finally cooled off. The sword chi of killing vanished. The terrifying sword essence, which had been charging non-stop in all directions, began to dissipate gradually. One after another, the thousands upon thousands of weapons which participated in the salute stopped moving. Even the bloody light which filled the sky began to fade. Finally, the scarlet longsword returned to normal, and, with a fierce roar, slowly headed back to its abode at the bottom of the mountain hole. Everything became peaceful again. Within Sword Suppression Valley, everyone opened their eyes, save for a small number of sword principle experts who remained in a state of epiphany. There was a look of pleasant surprise, yet also a little regret in the eyes of those who opened theirs. .bg container 63275 CC1F display, flex direction, column align items, center justify content, center Z index, 214-748-3647. Important. The pleasant surprise was because they all received huge benefits from the opportunity provided by the deeply mysterious thousand sword salute that just passed. Conversely, the regret was because the opportunity lasted way too short for them to enter an epiphany. In any case, the opportunity was over. It's over. Sighing softly, Hunjian Lord turned his eyes toward Qianming Lord by the side. Right at this moment, a 60 feet tall sword soul phantom appeared behind the latter. "Congrats, Qianming Lord," he said. "Ha ha." The latter looked pleasantly surprised too. "I'd thought it impossible to awaken a sword soul in this life. It's wonderful that I've finally awakened one, even if it's only second grade." Qianming Lord had indeed awakened a sword soul during the opportunity that just passed. Both of us have benefited considerably, but the people who benefited the most are those who remained in the secret chamber. By being nearest to the heart-killing sword, they felt the most and thus benefited the most, Hunjian Lord commented. "That's true. I'm jealous of them," Qianming Lord replied praisingly. The sword principle experts who entered an epiphany began to come round one after another, and each of them looked pleasantly surprised beyond compare. Subsequently, some of the dozen or so experts in the secret chamber walked out of said chamber. Within a short while, most of the sword principle experts were gathered together once again. "Where's the swordsman?" There was a look of astonishment on Hunjian Lord's face. All of the sword principle experts, including Su Ming and Jian Nantian, had stepped out of the secret chamber, leaving Jian Wushuang as the only person in there. The benefits he received must be huge. Hunjian Lord could not help remarking. All of a sudden, boom, a voluminous sword essence gushed from one of the secret chambers. Broad and imposing, it contained a boundless murderous intent as it swept across. The experts gathered in Sword Suppression Valley quickly detected the presence of the sword essence and immediately looked toward the secret chamber which Jian Wushuang was in. What they saw were 3 towering sword soul phantoms. Every one of them was close to 100 feet tall and stood side by side like peerless sword masters. The broad and imposing sword essence had originated from their bodies. 3 sword souls. 3 sword souls standing side by side, every one of them majestic in height and first grade. Who was it that awakened 3 first-grade sword souls? The sword principle experts who witnessed this scene were shell-shocked. They had already been shocked when Jian Nantian awakened 3 sword souls previously. However, back then, there was only 1 first-grade sword soul, with the other 2 being second-grade. That was nothing compared to the astoundment of seeing 3 first-grade sword souls. It's the swordsman. They came from the secret chamber he's in. There was a glimmer in the eyes of both Hunjian Lord and Qianming Lord. To awaken 3 first-grade sword souls was considered an incredible feat in Divine Land, throughout the history of which only a handful of people had been capable of awakening 3 first-grade souls. 3 first-grade sword souls. As one of the 9 sovereigns, even the lofty Su Ming revealed a hint of amazement on his handsome face. It should be known that, to someone who is called Sword Demon, this had only been the awakening of 3 first-grade sword souls. To awaken 3 first-grade sword souls could be considered monstrous. But if so, the sword ancestor's awakening of 6 first-grade sword souls should be considered monstrously beyond monstrous. It was precisely because the sword ancestor had defied the natural order that he earned his name as the ancestor of the sword principle. Though the appearance of the 3 sword souls had captured everyone's attention, this was but the beginning. The following scene would cause everyone's, including the sword principle experts and Master Su Ming's, hair to stand on their ends. Within the secret chamber, the 3 sword soul phantoms, which had been standing side by side, closed the distance between themselves and began to fuse together. A fusion of sword souls. Impossible. How can sword souls fuse? Many of the sword principle experts were so dumbstruck that their mouths were agape and their eyes were filled with astonishment. A fusion of sword souls? Since ancient times, there had been countless experts who had awakened souls, and among them had been many talented experts who awakened 2 or 3 souls, while a select number of exceptional geniuses had awakened 4 or even 5. The sword ancestor, who had awakened 6 sword souls, was considered a monster among monsters. However, regardless of how many souls these monsters had awakened, nobody had ever fused several sword souls together. It had never happened or even been rumored to have happened before. Throughout the history of the Divine Land, various experts had attempted to do so. However, because every awakened soul was unique, they could never be fused together regardless of what the experts tried. Nobody had ever managed to do it. Even the sword ancestor, who awakened 6 sword souls, could not. But now, in the secret chamber, the 3 sword soul phantoms behind Jian Wushuang were fusing together at a speed which allowed the process to be visible. Within Jian Wushuang's sea of consciousness, they had already fused together into one completely. The fusion was complete. Sure enough, the 3 first-grade sword souls had fused completely. In fusing the sword souls, Jian Wushuang had done what nobody in the Divine Land's history had done before. The crowd of sword principle experts, including Su Ming and Xianxia, stared fixedly at the secret chamber. A perfect fusion of 3 first-grade sword souls. Holy SHT! A series of cries began to reverberate throughout the valley. Chapter 485, 1,000 sword applause for the most powerful sword soul. Holy SHT! What a monster! A series of exclamations reverberated in the massive sword suppression valley, which was completely stirred up. The fusion of 3 sword souls was unprecedented in the history of the Divine Land. What was this if not monstrous? In the secret chamber, Jian Wushuang felt somewhat muddled upon becoming aware that he had fused 3 first-grade sword souls together completely. They are fused. They're fused just like that. Jian Wushuang murmured to himself, his eyes filled with disbelief. He had easily done what nobody else could ever do. It had been nothing more than an idea in his head, which he followed and ultimately succeeded in actualizing on his first attempt. He had done what was impossible for anyone else to do in the simplest, most casual, and most untroubled fashion. .bg container 63275 CC1F display, flex direction, column align items, center justify content, center Z index, 214-748-3647. Important, it's the heavenly creation skill. After calming down, he finally understood what went on. The biggest difference between him and others was the cultivation method he had mastered. He was an inverse cultivator who cultivated the heavenly creation skill. It was in the blood of inverse cultivators to defy the natural order and go against convention. The heavenly creation skill in his body had involuntarily operated during the fusion of the 3 sword souls. This was an indication that said skill was inextricably linked to his fusion ability. Jian Wushuang felt at ease once he understood this point. The heavenly creation skill was a heaven-defying cultivation method. Anything that was impossible would be made possible upon becoming related to it. The fused body of the 3 sword souls was clearly a tad smaller than what Jian Wushuang had imagined in his sea of consciousness. However, it soon began to shake violently and metamorphosis. That's right, it was a metamorphosis. The sword soul in the sea of consciousness was originally transparent, illusionary, and glass-like. However, its color gradually changed. A layer of gold gradually appeared over its transparent parts, like a newborn baby putting on his first set of clothes. The transparent sword soul seemed as if it had put on garments which were warm gold in color. In only a short time, the transparent and illusionary sword soul in the sea of consciousness metamorphosized into a golden sword soul which emitted a boundless radiance. At the same time, the majestic sword soul phantom, which was formed from the three phantoms behind Jian Wushuang, also began to metamorphosis. Like the sword soul in the sea of consciousness, a layer of gold appeared on and gradually covered its entire body. The majestic sword soul phantom gradually solidified and transformed into an impressive golden war god which body mass greatly expanded. It grew at an astonishing speed from its original stature of close to 100 feet. It exceeded 100 feet in the blink of an eye and still continued to grow rapidly. 110 feet. 120 feet. 150 feet. The golden war god, which was originally already of a towering height, grew non-stop under the horrified looks of the numerous sword principal experts in Sword Suppression Valley. Finally, when it reached 180 feet in height, it gradually stopped growing. 180 feet. A sword soul phantom of 180 feet. A golden sword soul phantom. What on earth is this? Shock and bewilderment. Confused, none of the sword principal experts could believe their eyes. For a sword soul phantom, 100 feet was considered the maximum height even if it was first grade. Furthermore, sword soul phantoms were but spectral images, or in other words, shadows, which were typically monotone. The sight in front of their eyes had utterly defied what was reasonable. A 180 feet tall, golden-colored sword soul phantom was no longer what they imagined a first-grade sword soul to be. It had surpassed the category of a first-grade sword soul. Is it above first grade? Many of the sword principal experts wondered. Its eyes, which had been tightly closed, opened vigorously right at this moment, a streak of boundless sword essence flashing across them. Boom! Gushing from its body was a boundless sword essence which was a few notches more powerful than the one emitted from the heart-killing sword. This sword essence swept forth with an overwhelming momentum. In a twinkling, it swept onto the bodies of many sword principal experts in the valley. The head-on approach of the gushing sword essence caused the faces of the experts to turn ghastly pale. Some experts even spat blood and hurriedly retreated backward. As it swept through the world, the terrifying sword essence carried an aura of transcendence and intent to outstrip all things of the universe. The next moment, ching, 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 shrilling sword echoes rang out in every corner of the valley. They were made by the weapons in the hands of the sword principal experts. These weapons had merely saluted when they faced the heart-killing sword previously. This time, however, under the attention of the 18 feet tall, golden sword soul phantom. Clang, 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 clang. Among the thousands of weapons in the valley, those which were magic weapons or better disregarded their owners as they surged out of the interspatial rings toward the sword soul phantom. Like a dense cloud of locusts which covered heaven and earth, thousands upon thousands of weapons gleamed in brilliant colors as they encircled the sword soul phantom. Subsequently, a supreme sword essence swept forth from the sword soul phantom. Shush! Thousands upon thousands of weapons saluted in unison at this very instant, sending shrilling sword echoes into the heavens. These echoes shook the entire world as if they were the voices of immortals. Far away from the divine land, in Jian Wushuang's hometown of the Nanyang continent. Inside a cave mansion located within the territory of the Tang dynasty, a middle-aged man in plain gray robes raised his head forcibly at this very moment. He was able to see clearly everything that was happening in the Sword Suppression Valley of the divine land through a void which was hundreds of millions of miles long. 1,000 sword applause for the most powerful sword soul. He's indeed worthy of being the chosen disciple. He has managed to achieve the most powerful sword soul in this kind of place and at such a young age. It probably won't be difficult for him to attain the most powerful sword principle hereafter. Laughing gently, the middle-aged man flipped his hand such that an object appeared in it. Astonishingly, it was a gray stone bead which was as big as a baby's fist. It emitted a peculiar aura. Jian Wushuang would certainly recognize this object with one look. It was exactly the same as the mysterious stone bead in his body which provided him with a heavenly creation skill. It seems that I have to find an opportunity to pass this to him.